Love You to Death, Stan Kraychik Mystery, Book 2. Writer Grant Michaels, publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1992. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 10. Not the Holiday Inn. At North Station, I phoned the shop to tell Ramon I might be late getting back there. I didn't tell him where I was, nor did I say anything about Nicole's bringing Tobias to the shop later. For all I knew, she was there already, so the less Ramon knew, the better, and if Nicole was annoyed at my lateness, there wasn't much she'd be able to do, since I'd be 20 miles away in lovely Abigail. I just made it onto the early afternoon train, which was one of the dilapidated old couches lingering from the golden days of the Boston and Maine Railroad. The nostalgia and romance of the rails were nowhere to be found in that old heap of metal, which smelled of diesel fumes and dried urine. After a tilty and bumpy start through the industrial wastelands of Boston's backyards, the shabby train snaked its way towards the North Shore. I lost all sense of time as I watched the varying montage pass by windows that were so filthy and scratched they were barely transparent. Still, I could discern small, shack-like houses, leafless woods, frozen streams jammed with debris, rusted auto carcasses, and finally, in polar opposition to all that preceded it, a revitalizing glimpse of the ocean. 2 minutes later, a handsome young conductor, mustachioed and uniformed to almost military severity, a complete anomaly to the grimy, malodorous surroundings of the couch, marched down the aisle announcing, "Abigail! Abigail!" Being susceptible to men in uniforms, I almost proposed to him on the spot, despite the wedding band on his left hand and the scent of cheap tobacco smoke in his wake. I got off the train and found a local town cab at the station. "I'm going to Kingsley's house," I told the driver. He eyed me with mistrust, then started the cab. We went through what looked like the main part of town, a pizza shop, a gas station, a hardware store, a small surf and turf restaurant, and a bait and tackle supplier. All the etc. of a small coastal community which, with one notable exception, I saw not one bar. "Where'd he get a drink around here?" I asked the cabbie. "A little early for that kind of thing." "Just asking." "Stranger here, huh?" "Visiting a friend." "You know the Kingsleys?" "I do." "You can get a drink there." "I don't need a drink. I just don't see any bars or liquor stores around." "Aren't any. You want liquor, you go to Gloucester. Abigail. Dry. And we lack it that way." "I wouldn't last long in a town like that. I could imagine all the residents sitting around in privacy and peace, waiting for their $10 million dividend checks. Squeaky clean, sweetie pie. Neat and orderly it all was. I half expected to see the Mary Baker Eddy Motel. Meanwhile, behind closed doors and drawn shades, these people were probably drinking, fighting and abusing each other mercilessly. But as long as the houses were tidy and the cars set spotless in their heated garages, everything was okay. Even the all-white residents looked fresh and lively walking along the sidewalks in their brightly colored winter togs. These were the same folks who remarked, "I never live in the city." They see urban life as low and dirty, steeped in sin and corruption, except when they come into town to suck out some money or jostle their wits. It kind of made me want to leave my working class mark on the place. Piss on a hydrant or something. The cab drove up a narrow, winding road, and I watched the town recede below us. It didn't seem like such a bad place from high up and far away. The village and small harbor finally disappeared as we headed out onto the ocean bluff, and my attitude changed immediately as the sea came into view. Even I have trouble grouching when I'm at the shore. The tide was up and rowdy, offering an expanse of turbulent blue-green water and white foam. That was a welcome relief from the claustrophobic air of the tiny village. We passed two large houses on the bluff, set far enough apart to be almost invisible to each other. The cab pulled into the tree-lined driveway of the third one. It was a huge, old three-story house covered with gray wooden shingles and topped with a clay roof, cluttered with gables and dormers and chimneys. From some of the ground floor windows, portions of the ocean showed clear through from the back of the house. Seeing the driveway empty, the cabbie said, "Looks like nobody's home." "I'm early. They are expecting me." "I'm early. They are expecting me." I paid him and requested a business card, phone number. "What for?" he asked. "I'll need a ride back to the train station later, unless you'd rather share the business with your competition." "Isn't any. I'm it. 2 cars, me and my wife." "Then I might as well meet your whole family while I'm here." I gave him a generous tip, figuring his superficial morality would compel him to show up promptly later on, since I'd just about prepaid my return trip. I got out of the cab and walked toward the front door of the large house. The driver didn't pull away as soon as he should have. I sensed he was watching me, hoping for some extra juicy bit of scandal to spread around town. I could almost hear him recounting to his wife. "Had a stranger from the city. Wanted a drink in the afternoon. Took him to the Kingsley's place. I think he was one of those male prostitutes or something." Hell, if the facts aren't interesting enough, change them. I felt the cabbie's eyes still on me, so I turned and waved to him. Then I veered away from the front door and followed a flagstone path which I hoped would lead me to another entrance behind the house. I finally heard the cab drive off and felt some relief. I did find a side door, so I knocked loudly on it, but as the cabbie had predicted, no one was home. Now what? I continued walking all the way around to the back of the house. A wide expanse of flat ground led to the bluff 50 yards away. The patchy ground snow was typical of the shore, since the ocean air tends to change snow into rain, but the snow that was there was clean and white and undisturbed. A gray, sun-bleached picket fence ran in a straight line, the full length of the property about 10 feet from the edge of the bluff, a cautionary reminder to casual strollers that the pounding surf and craggy rocks lay almost 100 feet below. Still presuming that Prentice Kingsley and Dan Dougherty were staying out here together, I figured I'd hang around until they showed up. I had no place to go and nothing to do until then. Snip's salon was far away, so I sat and enjoyed that sound of the surf and the rush of the wind. The bright sun gave a sense of warmth, but the cold ocean breeze soon dispelled the illusion. I sat for a long time and my eyes closed, letting the white noise of the surf lull me into a state of alpha consciousness. Awake in a dream, I sensed someone approaching me, and I happily assumed it was my lively subconscious once again beckoning my incubus. However, rather than ravish me as usual, my loving other self decided to speak to me this time. "Did you like the chocolate?" he asked with a French accent. I opened my eyes and turned my head. The sun blinded me for a moment, but I could still make out Rafik in all his tall, handsome glory. He was wearing a gray warm-up suit without an overcoat or jacket. The wind caused the soft flannel to hug his body and reveal a slender, well-formed physique, much like a dancer's. "Hi," I said, perhaps too enthusiastically. "I figured you had sent it." "You did not like?" His eyes drooped sadly. "I took it to the police to have it checked for poison." "Oh, none! I would not poison you." Then with an inviting smile he asked, "You are coming to see me?" "I came to see Prentice Kingsley. I'm curious why you're here, though." "I am here with Stani." "And Mr. Kingsley? Is he here, too?" With a wink, Rafik shook his head no. What a charmer. It could be easy to say yes to any demand of his. I began, "I just wanted to, control your yapper, Stanislav. Don't tell this gorgeous man you came here to warn Prentice Kingsley that someone is trying to kill him. I wanted to plan a little surprise for Liz and Danny, so I thought Prentice could help me with it, but don't tell Dan, okay?" "We have a secret plan, then." "Yeah, that's right, a secret." Sir, maybe we can have one more secret, he asked with a sly look. What do you mean? You like to go to bed? He pushed his right hand up under his sweatshirt, lifting it slightly so that I could watch him caress his taut belly and finger the short black hair. Damn! Why was this guy so interested in me? First at the party, now out here by the ocean? What about Danny? I asked. Danny? He's not home. But aren't you two? Raffi shook his head. No. We are not lovers anymore. I thought you said you were here with him. I am with him, but not together. Then why are you here? Raffi grinned self-contentedly. Mr. Kingsley invite me. But you just said he's not here, I said, trying to get his story straight. Yes, he is not. I work at his company driving the truck. You know. Yes, I know, but does that qualify you to stay at his summer place in the middle of winter? Oh, sure. His hand pushed the jacket up further to show a well-formed pectoral. So you want to go inside? I would like to get warm. I have a good idea, he said, and suddenly peeled off his sweatshirt. His muscular chest had is neatly trimmed, fan-shaped mat of coarse hair, clipped short and bristly. The cold air set it all on end, and the rest of his skin also went bumpy in the breeze. His nipples greeted the frigid air with a perky salute through the dark hair. Come, he said, and undid his sweatpants as well. He jogged away from me, then stopped momentarily to pull off the sweatpants, leaving only his robin's egg blue jockstrap. I was right, he did look like a dancer, and he moved like one too, as though this were all a familiar sequence of steps rehearsed and performed many times before. But I'll confess, his furry limbs sure were appealing against the patchy snow. He turned toward me and beckoned. We go to bed now. He ran toward the solarium attached to the back of the big house. Being a lonely pile of flesh and bones, I'd be a fool to pass up a chance like that. I got up from the bench and headed toward the house, picking up Rafik's discarded clothing along the way. Already the wife. As I got near the house, Dan Dougherty emerged from the pathway that led around from the front of the house. What the hell are you doing here? He demanded. Then he saw Rafik's near-naked body entering the solarium while I stood there holding his clothes. Dan frowned and said, Figures you'd get your way with him, Vanessa. Don't worry, he said, irritated but resigned. I'm used to it. He's good for nothing. Dan watched Rafik waving energetically from inside the solarium. I take that back. Rafik is certainly good for one thing. Danny, I didn't come here to have sex with him. I came to talk to Prentice and you. I even tried to find you at your place last night. I've got some unpleasant news, I'm afraid. Vanos, you can cut the crap. You don't need an excuse to have sex with Rafik. Really, it's anything goes out here in the burbs. I'm not making excuses, Danny, and you can call me Stan now. Vanos is okay in the shop, but this has nothing to do with the shop. His face relaxed slightly. You mean it, don't you? He said with less anger in his voice. You're serious. Yes, this is serious. We better go inside then. We walked by the solarium. Rafik stood within, exposed and appealing in his glass cage. Cripes, I just about got my sludgy juices moving again, and yet again I had to interrupt the flow. I don't know why my parents didn't just name me Frustration. Inside the house, Dan removed his down-filled parka and hung it in a fastidiously organized closet. Take your coat off. Get comfortable, he said. I dropped my jacket on a chair, but Danny picked it up and hung it, arranged it alongside his in the closet over the designer. Then he led me into a large, bright room with numerous bay windows, complete with window seats and chintz-covered cushions, all facing out onto the bluff and the ocean beyond. The fireplace was blazing, even though it was mid-afternoon. Through one of the front windows, I saw Danny's car, easily identified by the vanity plates. Design. Danny flopped himself onto one of the sofas. I sat in a high armchair that enveloped me luxuriously as the down-filled cushions wheezed out their air. "Is Prentice here?" I asked. "No," he said, inclining and stretching himself out provocatively. I hoped it wasn't for my benefit. "Danny, it's important that you both hear this. Will you promise to tell him?" "Depends." His eyes seemed to be flirting, and I soon recognized a behavior pattern that I'd often seen with other couples. Love my spouse, love me. I said, "Depends isn't good enough, Danny. I found out something about the poisoned chocolate that killed that man the other night. The one Lorette Cole gave to her boyfriend." "That's the point. It was a mistake. The truffle that killed the guy was intended for Prentice Kingsley." Danny pulled himself upright and faced me with sudden alarm. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Lorette made a last-minute switch because the original truffle had become damaged." "But how do you know it was meant for Prentice?" "Because it was almond-flavored. Lorette said that one was for him, and the almond flavoring easily covered the taste of the cyanide." Dan began a nervous laugh, then grew and grew until it verged on hysteria. He got up and poured himself a shot of whiskey from a crystal decanter. He downed it in one grand gesture as though acting in a bad soap opera. Then he turned to me and said flatly, "The almond truffle was not for Prentice. It was for me. Prentice is allergic to almonds." "Are you sure?" Danny smirked. I ought to know. He'd never asked for an almond truffle. The flavors obviously got mixed up. I quickly replayed the party scene in my head. So that's why he spit his chocolate out that night. He was afraid of an allergic reaction. "That's right." Danny's voice started wavering, and since I was supposed to get the almond truffle, that means someone wanted to kill me the other night. But who and why? Without answering, Danny poured himself another drink, then realized he hadn't offered me one yet. He held the decanter toward me and asked, "Scotch?" I replied, "Bourbon, neat." He poured an inch of fine bourbon into a crystal tumbler and handed it to me. Then he sat in the other armchair and spoke. "Prentice has a half-brother, John Lowe. He hates me." "Why?" "He thinks I'm corrupting Prentice, that I've turned him gay." "Is it true?" Dan squirmed in his chair. "Prentice and I have a deep friendship. He confides in me." "Is that all?" With an angry look, Danny said, "There is no sex between us." "Whose decision?" "None of your goddamn business. Isn't it a little extreme to think John Lowe wants to kill you because you're close to Prentice?" "And because I'm gay, and therefore I'm bad." "But why pick now to do it? The opportunity was right, I guess." "It sounds too simple, Danny. There must be something else." He got up to refill his glass again. All along, he'd been pouring himself more than an inch, yet the liquor didn't seem to be affecting him. "Well, since you're so smart, Venos, excuse me, I mean Stan, what do you think?" I looked into his eyes. "I think money." Danny went back to the sofa, lay down, and put his stocking feet up on the cushions. "Money, money, money. Here's to money," he said, and raised his glass in a toast. "You're right, of course. You're always right, aren't you?" "Far from it." Danny closed his eyes and spoke as though reciting from a memorized script. "Prentice inherited his money from his mother, Helen Kingsley." "What about his brother John?" Danny shook his head. "A half-brother. He was born after Prentice, when their father remarried, so he got nothing besides the Kingsley name. Always went to the woman up until the last one, Helen Kingsley. Since Prentice was her only child, she died giving birth to him. He inherited everything, the money, the company, the property, everything that usually went to the oldest daughter. So that's why Prentice retains the Kingsley name as a kind of memorial to his mother." Dan shook his head. "Not a memorial. Guilt. It's all guilt. Imagine killing your mother just by being born, then getting all that money. At least he gets to live a life of ease." "Prentice has plenty of problems, believe me." I shrugged. The neuroses of the wealthy rarely aroused my sympathy. Finally, Dan's speech was showing the slightest slur. He tries to be generous with John. He even made up that position for him at the factory, some monkey job in corporate administration. Sally would make you puke. So John should be content, not murderous. But he wants money. He wants bigger money. He wants the whole thing, and now Liz is in the past picture, and John's afraid she's going to get some of it. So how do you fit into all this? Danny looked at me with watery, unfocused eyes. Hey, what is this, a goddamn game show with all the questions? Someone tried to kill you or Prentice the other night. I'm just trying to establish motive. Fine. Then make a motive. Dan gulped the rest of his whiskey, then staggered up to pour himself another. He faltered over the decanter. If I'm dead, John gets more. That's the motive. And he'll sleep better if he removes another of us filthy vermin from the face of the earth. I couldn't recall John Lowe having the capacity for that much passion. Meanwhile, Rafik had quietly entered the room. He looked sullen and dejected, though he'd put on a colorful new set of warm-ups. Quit wearing my clothes, see? Dan shouted with an obvious slur. Rafik looked at me sadly as though I'd reneged my troth of undying love, as if to say, See how I live without you. Dan, I said, where is Prentice now? He shrugged. I don't know. Dan turned suddenly to Rafik. Hey, why don't you go play in the snow, Raffy baby? Maybe roll off the edge and leave me in peace. I do nothing to hurt you, Danny. Your life gives me pain. I go now. He turned to me and spoke almost imploringly. You will come to the solarium later? I scratched my ear. I think you might arrange your assignations more discreetly, Rafik. Ah, you are romantique. Huh? L'assignation alors. I'll come and say goodbye before I leave. Rafik left us alone. Then I asked Dan, Did you tell the police any of this the other night? Rafik's interruption seemed to snap Dan back to sobriety, at least for a few minutes. Can you imagine what they'd do with this piece of faggot sensationalism? But you think John Lowe wants to kill you. If I told the police that, there'll be absolutely nothing. They'll write me off as a hysterical queen. I looked at Dan. Maybe he was right. He did tend to embody the archetypical urban American gay designer clone. Dan, will you promise to tell Prentice what we talked about today? It's important that he knows that the killing the other night was not accidental and that the intended victim may have been he or you. You said he confided in you. You owe it to him to tell him. Don't tell me what to do. I wasn't going to get much further with him, and my welcome was obviously spent, at least in the main part of the house. I asked, Can I use your phone to call a cab? You can call from the solarium when you and Rafik are done. I got up and extended a hand to Danny. What's that for? He asked. To show my good intentions. Save it for some other sap. I left him and set off to meander through the hallways of the large house, first picking up my jacket along the way, then aiming myself in the general direction of the solarium. I found it guided by the bright light coming from the open doorway that led out to it. Though it was early February, the glass-enclosed structure was very warm, almost too warm. Certainly it was warm enough to lie about naked on the white wickerwork furniture and feel the welcome heat of the sun penetrate your frozen winter flesh and thaw your frozen winter bones. Rafik was lying on one of the padded lounge chairs. He'd placed a towel discreetly across his crotch, but underneath it lurked a lively mound of flesh. His eyes were closed, but he knew it was I who'd entered the heated structure. Lay down on me, he said. I sat on the edge of the plump cushion. Rafik? He opened his eyes just a slit. Who want to kill Danny. His fiery eyes shot open. I want to kill him. You? He make us so miserable why he cannot say Fanny and leave me alone. We do not love each other. Why did you come here then? I was here. He came to see me. I knew he was lying since the visible facts were exactly the reverse. It was Danny's clothes and Danny's car that were ensconced at the place, not to mention his confidential relationship to Prentice Kingsley. Whatever that meant. But damn, he was handsome, and the hot sun made his skin smell of mild, sweet spice. And I was hungry. The scent and the heat and the look of him made me blurt without thinking. How did you get to look like this? It's my family, he said, enjoying my admiration. And I was a dancer, he added with a complacent smile, eyes closing again. But now, I still do ballet. None of the bars I went to ever did that for my body. Can you help me, Rafik? His eyes opened again, this time with that come on a my house look. Of course I help you, I asked. You work at the factory, right? Yes, he answered, disappointed by the kind of help I was seeking. I want to find out who made those chocolates, the ones for the party last Sunday night. He weighed this all for a moment, then pulled my head down to his and kissed me on the mouth with a real affectionate smooch. I tell you, Stani. You know? I know everything. Who then? You will stay with me. His dark eyes sure knew how to tell love-laden lies. I shook my head. Not here, not with Danny around. Then I keep my secret, he said with a grin. In a lame imitation of Blanco, I grunted. Then I go. I called for a cab and asked for the female driver. That done, I hung up and turned to Rafik's warm, prone body. I tweaked him lightly on his left nipple and said, A tout à la hors diable. Then I stood up and walked out of the place. If Rafik hadn't been so damn appealing and hadn't stimulated my vesicles, I would have written him off as a first-class hustler and exploiter, but his body heat and his suave continental manners seemed to jam out any negative traits he possessed. When the cab arrived to take me back to the train station, my stupid crotch was still saying, yes. Some people think I'm oversexed, that sex is my focus, but in truth, I'm one of those unfortunate souls who confuse sex and love. I'm just over lonesome, and the simplest way to handle it is always to be searching for the perfect bedmate. It looks to others like an insatiable libido when it's actually an unfulfilled urge to nestle and nest. The proof? Put a porn movie on the VCR, and 2 minutes later I'm contemplating housework. But on the other hand, invite me away on a romantic weekend and I'm yours forever. Well, for 3 days anyway. So all the rumblings that Rafik was causing within me were more related to the lack in my life of the heavenly phrase, "Honey, I'm home," than to his sinewy muscles, his chiseled face, and his nice endowment. I got back to the North Station around 5:30 and went directly to Snip's. I figured Nicole would be waiting there with Tobias, ready to pounce on me and scold me. I was right. She was reading to him quietly in the waiting lounge, but the minute I walked in, she got up and dragged me to the back room, where she slammed the door closed. "Where were you?" she demanded. It was important. I had to go. "So what's managing this shop, Stanley? When I gave you the keys, I expected a certain level of responsibility, which is something you seem to have lost." "Nicky, don't Nicky me. I'm tired of this Nancy Drew impersonation. You lied to me that morning, Stanley. I abhor that." "But, and you're not scoring any points with Chaz either. He's thinking about dropping Laurette's case." "But that's unethical. He can't desert her just because he doesn't approve of me." "He's a lawyer. He knows his rights. And I know he's a jerk. Enough! It's been a difficult date. For me too, doll." She pulled out a cigarette and lit it nervously. It was rare for Nicole to use a cigarette as a prop, since it usually provided pleasure for her. That boy is quite a handful, Stanley. Are you sure you're up to caring for him? He's not so bad once you get used to him. As if you should know. Well, you'll have plenty of opportunity to find out since I won't be helping you anymore. Why not? Chaz wants his time with me alone. Tarzan speaks. He thinks you may be a bad influence on the boy. Neanderthal brain. When Chaz came out from his shower this morning, Tobias tried to look under his towel. So? So what's he looking for? I should think that's obvious, doll. Nicole's eyes were furious. Nikki, he just wants to make sure he's the same as other men. The difficulties don't stop there. We took him to the zoo, you know? How children are supposed to like the zoo? I nodded and anticipated what she was about to tell me. And the animals put on a floor show for him. No, it was worse. He found some stones and was throwing them at the lions. It was pandemonium. The roaring was horrible. Finally, the guards ordered us all out. Poor Charles. He must have been mortified. Nicole glared at me. Stanley, even I was disturbed by the boy's behavior, and I'm certainly no animal lover. Nikki, Tobias is angry about what's happening to his mother. It's better for him to release the anger than to repress it. That's bosh. He's an ill-mannered little monster. He's only 4 years old. You can't expect him to be a paragon of etiquette. Chaz thinks the corruption is irreversible, and he believes that you are partly responsible. That's absurd. Maybe not, Stanley. Silence. Puff, puff. Smokescreen. Whose side are you on, sis? Nicole faltered for just a second. There are no sides. Chaz is a very satisfactory lover, Stanley, despite what you perceive to be flaws in his character. He's trying to cause a rift between us, Nikki. Homophobes tend to do that, and the educated, clever ones do it sneakily, the way Charles does. Stanley, I don't want to lose him. Not just yet. And at the same time, I don't want to have to choose between the two of you. How do you think I feel? Do you think I like being pitted against an Olympic rug muncher? Nicole crushed her cigarette carelessly, not with the usual delicacy. You have a way of debasing everything. It clears the air. It's coarse. Everything is at the bottom. You sound just like a man now. I am a man. Yes, I sometimes forget that. Well, I can no longer help out with caring for the boy. He's all yours, Stanley, and if you can't handle it, then the courts should take him. Cripes! Even if Tobias was somewhat disturbing to our pretty little lives, a foster home certainly wasn't the answer, not when Nikki and I could offer him friendly, familiar places to stay. Besides, I'd promised Laurette that I'd take care of him, of course. That had been under the assumption that it would be for only one night. Nikki, I'm not going to give the kid up until the police come and take him from me. Suit yourself. She latched her purse forcefully and yanked it up over her shoulder. And as for your shirking your duties today, I am not asking for your keys, but consider yourself on probation for a month. But Nicole raised her hand to silence me, much the way Branko had at the party the other night, and made me wonder if my lying to her earlier about being on probation with Branko had caused it to become a reality now with her. She said, were they in cahoots against me too? Nicole spoke as if announcing a corporate policy change. Ramon has proven that he's perfectly capable of managing the shop. If you don't want the responsibility, he'll gladly step in. It was happening again. Ramon was displacing me. Damn conniving little liar. I never trusted him or his story. He was supposedly from Paris, and he'd wormed his way into Snips by dropping some names that Nicole recognized from her modeling days back there. But I reasoned that if a young man knew people from her generation so well, he was probably a clever opportunist who traded on his youth and looks. Nicole insisted that he was simply cultured. Ramon also claimed to be bisexual, which was a kind of fashion statement for him, and which also seemed to increase his tips. But what I really mistrusted him for was his interest in my client list and my expert technique. He had few clients of his own, and he envied my position as Snip's lead stylist. Besides, Ramon was hatefully good-looking and suave, which really grated on and expose my blue-collar background. "No," I said sharply in my best all-male imitation. "Then grow up, Stanley, and do your job." She left the back room abruptly and continued on right out of the shop, even before putting on her coat. Nikki and I had fought before. During our worst ones, I'd actually quit and gone to work at another salon. Those 6 weeks were hell for both of us. I even considered returning to my first profession as a psychologist, but fortunately, Nikki and I made up, and we promised that we'd never get that angry again. Yet here I was, being punished like a naughty boy. What had I done that was so wrong? When I came out from the back room a few minutes later, Tobias was standing outside. "Uncle Stan, should I go away?" He'd obviously overheard everything. "No, Tobias. I'm just not used to having a boy around. Give me a little time, okay?" How could I explain to him that the best way he could help me would be to show me where his on and off switch was? That way I could put him on a shelf and take him down again whenever it suited me. Parenthood and I were obviously incompatible. Back to work it was. The one remaining name on my book was a new customer. He was a good-looking man, rugged and muscular, probably in his late 20s. He told me he was an actor and was in town for the tryouts of a new show. While I was cutting his hair, he asked me if I'd like to go to the theater with him that night. Since he had tickets, I figured Rafik must have activated my pheromones, because I don't usually get such easy invitations from such hunky men. Regretfully, I had to say no, since I'd be playing my own role of daddy again that night. With the workday over, Tobias and I headed back to my place. I asked him, "Are you ready for supper?" He nodded vigorously. "How about soup and sandwiches?" "Negative." "Pizza again?" "Equally strong negative." "Then what, Tobias?" "Burgers." So much for the diet. We headed for the downtown branch of Acme Burgers. Yes, there is such a place, and it's hamburgers heaven. I knew they had deluxe salad plates for the chick, slender crowd of which I seemed destined to be a non-member. And once inside, the smell of grilled burgers and onions and fries convinced me that 15 make that 20 extra pounds on a 5-foot 10-inch long-limbed Slavic frame wasn't really a serious problem. I had more important matters to contend with, like attempted murder. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.